Testing, testing. So we're expecting 70 people, and we don't seem to have 70 people, so talk amongst yourselves. There Okay, guys, it looks like we're going to try and start this morning session. So if you can take your seats. So how do the slides? Okay, so we've got 1.5 hours now to try and get through some interesting ideas, hopefully, around policy engagement. And we're planning an interactive session, so you're going to have to do some stuff. But first of all, I think most of you know me, but I'm not sure if you know Emma Williams. So we have what we've called a policy advisory group. Thank you. Sorry. The PAG. Yeah, I forgot what my acronym was. So anyway, Emma's helping a lot with trying to implement, and I'm sure that you've been contacted by Emma, many of you. And so we're going to run this session. So first slide. I'm just going to give a small welcome and introduction. Try and get just through some basic definitions, just so we're all on the same page. And then we got a small exercise just to get to know each other, find out who we are, and then we're going to move on to a further exercise. So Emma's going to introduce that, and we're going to get you to do some interesting discussions and fill in some forms. And then I'm going to try and go through some top tips for policy engagement, which we put together, so SEI's top tips. And then Kalpana Giri is going to give us a talk related to the interesting work in the development of the policy engagement strategy and plans in the SEI Asia office, and then we'll wrap up. So we've started about a quarter of an hour late, so we're going to finish a quarter of an hour late, if that's okay with Niall, and with the participants. So, okay, so we'll get started. So, what we hope that you're going to get out of this is to learn some features of SEI's policy engagement and policy influence. We hope that you're going to reflect on your own policy engagement and get the views of other people in the room. And we also want the information that we gather from the exercises to contribute to our assessment of how we're going about our policy engagement, go through these top tips, and learn about some of these ideas in Asia. So, next slide, please. So let's just start with some definitions. All of these things are subject to change, but I think rather than discuss for ages what policy engagement is, we've got a working definition, and that is it's an observed change in the processes, behaviors, and content of decision-making by key boundary partners and processes as a result of the knowledge that is supplied or co-generated. So this is our working definition, and it's built on the booklet that SEI produced on policy impact. So one of the things I want to clear up is, so I'm called the policy director, and for some people that means, oh, so you're only interested in policymakers. That's not true, okay? But the policy and decision maker at all levels director just didn't seem to roll off the tongue, so it became policy director. But let me make it clear that we are talking about the decision makers that we work with at different scales, and that can include organizations, NGOs, etc. But we do have our mission statement, and I think this is something that Johan said earlier. So we're supposed to induce change towards sustainable development. So there is an implication in that we have to develop impact at scale. And so this impact at scale doesn't necessarily mean it has to be national policy, but we need to have some idea of replicating actions over a wider region, country, or parts of the world. And we're working basically with people. So as you know, the outcome mapping, the concept of boundary partners, it's about making change in people's behaviors and attitudes. Oh, what happened there? So, yes. So boundary partner. I think this is an interesting thing. It seems that everyone has their own definition of a boundary partner. And it would be useful to try and get a clear understanding about how people are using this term. So we have one definition here: those individuals, groups, or organization with whom SEI interacts with directly and where there are opportunities for influence. Discuss. I think that, you know, this is a working definition. If anyone objects to that definition, is there anyone who thinks that this isn't a good definition to start with, at least? But we need to differentiate them according to their roles. We need to make sure, well, who is a project partner? So one of the interesting discussions I've been having here is, to what extent are other academics boundary partners, or are they project partners? You know, so those are quite important when we're trying to understand our influence. The other, we've heard a bit that, you know, in the Asia Center, certainly in the SummerNet program, outcome mapping is used extensively. And I think that this is a very interesting idea. And basically, just so we're all on the same page, and I know for some of you this will be just telling you what you already know, but still, it's about outcome and not impact. And so the reason why people came up with this idea of outcome mapping is that a lot of donors were saying, we must understand your impact. What are your concrete deliverables? And it's very difficult for us to sort of attribute our actions to an impact, but it's much easier to step back one stage further to look at outcomes. And this is because development is really complex, and to say that we as an individual institution can affect change on our own isn't the way the world works. Maybe occasionally we can point at something like that, but generally all policy and decision making is influenced by a whole load of different influences, and we're one of them. And then essentially the sorts of things that outcome mapping look at is, you know, what is the vision of what will be changed? Who are the boundary partners that can affect that change? So it's that people-centric approach, and what change is being sought, and how is SEI going to contribute to that change process? So it's a useful concept. I'm not sure how embedded it is across the whole of SEI. Be interesting to find out. And even within the Asia Center, I know it's used in the SummerNet program, but how much elsewhere? So anyway, so that was just a few ideas, some sensitive this. So are there any comments on this before we move on to our first exercise? Is there anyone who thinks that this is barking up the wrong tree, as they say in England? Okay, moving on to the first exercise. So this is where we get to know you, the audience. So I'm sure that you've seen this from the strategy. I'm sure you've all read the strategy from cover to cover. And so what we want to do is to work out where you find your work sitting. So in the strategy it says we go, you know, we do some work on the applied sciences. We do quite a lot of assessment and synthesis work or policy analysis. We even go through all the way through to supporting implementation of policy. Now what I want you to do is on your table you've got some little dots, and you've got about 3 minutes to go to your nearest flip chart and put your dots on here where you think, with red, where most of your work sits on that continuum, yellow, where you often work, and blue, the first mistake, blue, that is, that second yellow is actually blue, where you occasionally work. Okay? 3 minutes starting from now. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to count up how many people, we'll do a little bar chart after this so we can see in the audience where people most frequently think they're doing work. And don't put them over each other or we can't count them. You got 2 more minutes, so, don't dawdle. Yeah, anywhere within that, space, as long as you don't put them over each other, because then we can't count them. You have 1 more minute. Okay, you should be wrapping up now. Some people are finding it very difficult to understand where they work. Okay. Well done. You kept to time, more or less. So it'll be interesting. We'll come back. It's a quite fast. There's quite a good spread over the back there. More towards policy implementation on that one. And here it's from synthesis to policy implementation. And then over here we've got there are a number who are on the applied sciences as well. So anyway, we'll do an interesting little graph of this and we can find out who we are. But now we've got another participatory exercise for you. So one of the things that we've been doing, and Emma's going to introduce this next, is trying to analyze the pathways by which we try and engage with our decision makers, whatever scale it might be. So this is kind of based on the responses that we've got from people talking to them about the ways that they try and influence decision making. And so on your table, you will find there's one for each person, is there? There's one for each person. So what I want you to do is to look down these 16 pathways to engagement with decision making. And the first question, I want you to put a 1, a 2, and a 3 in something where you think that you most often use a method. And then the second one is the next most, and the third is the next most. And it might be that there is a more influential path which you haven't actually used or which you do use. And that's the second question. So which pathway do you think that could have the biggest influence on this? And then you will have a chance in the next part, which Emma's going to introduce, to look at sort of some pathways which you use which are not represented here. So don't worry if you're saying, but the way I do it is different. You'll have a chance in the next exercise. So please, if you could just spend a couple of minutes, we'll give you another three minutes to look through these and then try and answer those 2 questions. So if you could all do that, that would be great. Yeah, well, it's to be able to see it on the screen. Okay, you got 20 choices. So, off you go. That's an individual exercise. And we'll be collecting this, and it'll be very interesting for us to sort of understand how you feel you're engaging with policy and or would ideally like to be. Just to clarify, in the second question, they could be approaches that you use, but they could be any of these approaches. So your A, B, C. Okay, just while you're finishing that off, I'll hand over to Emma, and she can introduce herself and introduce the next part of it. But so if you could carry on filling it in, and Emma, if you introduce yourself and carry on.
Yep, hello everybody. So as Johan was saying, my name is Emma Williams, and I've joined the policy. Can everybody hear me? Yep. So as Johan said earlier, my name is Emma Williams, and I'm working in the York Centre with Johan as part of the Policy Advisory Group. I've been with SEI 5 months now, and I've got an environmental engineering background, so more in the private sector. So that's just a little bit of background of me. A little bit of housekeeping. There is an attendance form, one form, circulating around the room somewhere. So if anybody's not seen that yet, please just keep circulating that around the tables. That would be great. And it looks as though people have stopped writing. So what I will do is go on to the next part of the session. And this is where I'm going to be talking to you about features of SEI's successful policy engagements. And we will be doing an exercise. But before I go on to tell you what the exercise is and what we'll be doing, I just want to quickly go through, for those of you who are, like me, new to SEI or who've not been involved with our work yet, is just to give you a very, very quick background to the goals and activities that we've been doing to get us to where we are today, just to introduce the activity. So the goals of this particular aspect of our work, as Johan mentioned earlier, is to understand our SEI's policy engagement with a view to determining successful features of our policy engagement so that we can all use those in our work together. And also, we've been looking at the literature to try to understand models of policy engagement and to try to put SEI's work into context in terms of that theory. And this is all with a view to obviously improving our policy engagement work and in terms of our mission of bridging that gap between science and policy. So that's the overall aims of this part of our work. And in terms of the activities we've been doing to date, so what have we done to find out so far how we are successfully engaging with policymakers and decision makers at SEI? Well, we've undertaken interviews with some of you. Some of you have also filled out the SEI staff survey last year, which had some questions on policy engagement. Some of you in the room may have been involved with a climate change policy webinar that Johan held, I think, last year. So there's been various activities that we've been doing to try and gauge what we as SEI think at the moment we are doing successfully in terms of policy engagement work. And out of that work, what we've done is interviews were recorded and we've transcribed them and we've looked at documents, and using an inductive approach, we have come up with a broad framework to try and describe in some context from this analysis as to what SEI's policy engagement or successful policy engagement looks like at the moment. And we've come out with 3 broad areas for this, which you can see up on the PowerPoint. And these are what we're calling enabling conditions, pathways, and outcomes. So enabling conditions are things that allow us as SEI to do our work. And these have been split into 3 further categories. And again, those are up there. The first one being characteristics of SEI. So things like our reputation, credibility, trust, so our image, so things like that that attract policymakers and decision makers to our work. The next one is the problem and issue context. So for example, if we've worked in a problem space previously, that might make it more likely that decision makers will ask us as SEI to work in that area again, for example. And the third one in terms of those characteristics is the system. So understanding, for example, the political context in which our work is placed. Because we may do the best research in the world, but if it's not on the political agenda at that particular time, it may not be taken up and that evidence may not be used. So that's a feature that we think is important. The second features are pathways. So this is activities that we as SEI undertake to engage with policy and decision makers. So, for example, a perfect example actually is the Science Forum, particularly the external day earlier this week, where we obviously have invited decision makers, policy makers, and throughout the week. So that's one of our ways of a pathway to engaging with decision makers. And then the final category is the outcomes. And these are consequences of SEI's research that help us to inform policy and engage with policy and decision makers. And this could be anything from a formal paper submitted into a journal, or it could be talking with our boundary partners, for example, or it could be implementing a direct policy change. So these are all outcomes. So those are the 3 the sort of structure of our analysis. So enabling conditions, pathways, and outcomes. And the exercise that I'm going to describe shortly will come on to use those features, and this is where we'll be asking you for some input. So this is just, so earlier I mentioned that we had undertaken interviews and we transcribed them, and we use that inductive approach to achieve these sort of 3 broad structures, so the pathways and outcomes, etc. So this is just to give you a bit of an example. So say just, I'm not expecting you to read all of this. So say, for example, take the bottom one. So someone has quoted, so someone within SEI, in many instances, SEI is seen as a convening power and an important expert voice. So this has been attributed the feature of image. So that just gives you an example of how we've come up with these features. And policy engagement. Now, policy engagement is incredibly complex, as we already know. And this is a quote that Johan and I often refer to, and I'll just read it out for anybody who can't see it at the back. So the study of research utilization in decision-making and policy implementation is so complex and multifaceted that the assumption that a single framework or theory can explain all its facets and effects is absurd. It is not easy. And with the 80 characteristics or features that we've already identified, we are still, between Johan and ourselves, between other staff, we still have debate as to whether the features are in the correct category, so those 3 categories that I mentioned earlier. So what I'm going to do is introduce an activity to you where we would like your help and input with these 80 features of SEI's policy engagement to help us to determine whether we think we've got them right or whether there's any missing. And I will go on to introduce the activity to you. Before I introduce the activity in terms of actually what we want you to do, just to let you know sort of the outcomes, things that we would like you to get out of this activity. So we want to share with you the 80 features so that you may learn from each other some of the successful features that have been identified. We also hope you'll be able to reflect on your own policy engagement and also have fruitful discussions with colleagues to share best practice and learn as well. And what we would like to get out of it as the Policy Advisory Group is we would like your expertise and experience to help us to determine, have we identified the correct success features? Have we got any missing gaps? Do you think the approach that we've taken is the right one? Do you agree with the 3 categories, for example? And it's just to get that feedback to help us with our work moving forwards. So, in terms of the activity itself, you will notice around the room the several flip charts. So where you were just placing stickers, underneath those sticker charts, there is tables. Each of these tables has some of the features of successful policy engagement. So I'm not going to ask you to look at all 80 in one go. So you've got about 12 to 15 between groups. So I'd like you, in your tables in a moment, to move to one of the flip charts. And please don't leave any unattended, otherwise we'll have a gap in what we're trying to achieve. And there's 4 questions. The questions are all written on the flip chart, so you don't need to write these down. But just to quickly go through what I'd like you to do, and we're going to have 15 minutes for this activity, and then we'll come back and have some feedback and discussion afterwards. The first thing I'd like you to do is, as an individual, is if you could take some of the coloured stickers that are on your tables. Doesn't matter which colour, the colours don't mean anything for this exercise, but what we'd like you to do is, at your flip chart, have a look at the features of policy engagement that you've been provided with in your table, and just to choose the 3 that you think are the most influential or the most important for SEI's policy engagement. And just place your 3 stickers, and if you think one idea is absolutely fabulous, we don't want you to put all 3 stickers on the one idea. We do want you to try and sort of give your top 3 to us, please. If you could do that as individuals. Then the second thing is, as a group, question number 2, we'd like you to go through the features that you've been given. Do you agree that they're in the right category? Do you agree that it is actually a feature of successful SEI policy engagement? Or if you think it's complete nonsense, strike it through, put a no in the column, just let us know which ones you think are brilliant and which ones you don't. The third thing we'd like you to do is identify any gaps. So if you think, oh, well, okay, you've got those 10 items up there, but I always do X, then please put it in the question 3 box. Now, you will notice the question 3 box, for some of you, will already have items filled in. This is because, for example, with the pathways category, we've actually got 25 pathways identified, and 15 minutes for one group to go through 25 pathways, it just wasn't going to happen. So we've split those out into separate groups. So rather than you then writing the list of what the other group has got, because you can't see it, what we've done is provided just a brief list of what the other group will be looking at, just so we don't replicate those ideas for question 3. Then the final thing we want you to do is, for question 4, is just to put down any project examples. So where, for example, we've got outcome 21, reframe the debate. If you've worked on a project and you think that that was a really key part to your successful engagement with policy and decision makers, we'd like to know what project that was and some contact details so we can follow up and do some best practice learning and sharing throughout the next few years with this policy work that we're working on. So essentially, that's the activity. So I'd like to invite you all to go to your nearest flip charts. Please don't leave any empty. So if you can split yourselves up, and we'll give ourselves 15 minutes, and then we'll come back for 10 minutes of feedback. Now, there are 7 groups, so I just want you to think in your feedback that 30 to 60 seconds is all, I'm afraid, we're going to have for feedback. But if you could have a little think, it may well be there's one feature you all really desperately agreed on that you might want to feedback. But please, if I could ask for that to be concise, just for the time constraints. Thank you.
Maybe if you then choose somebody to give 60-second reporting back, that would be great. And so feel free to discuss amongst yourselves and compare experience and see what you think, have a debate. Off you go.
Okay, everybody, just to let you know, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left of your 15 minutes. So if people could really start to be at least beyond question 3, if not moving on to question 4, that'd be great. Thank you. Okay, everybody, this is the 1-minute warning. So if you can start thinking about what you're going to feed back. And I think from walking around the room, I think the activity has been quite ambitious. So please don't worry about feeding back on everything. So that's 1 minute. And also, it would be great if you could put your names on the flip chart as well for every group member, just so we can continue those discussions offline and in the future. That would be great. So 1 minute, thank you. Okay, everybody, that is 15 minutes up. So what I'd like everybody to do is if you can nominate a spokesperson for your groups, and it's up to you whether you want to stay around your flip chart or whether you want to take your seats and leave your spokesperson. And what we'll do is we'll just go around the room, and we've got up to a maximum of 1 minute for feedback, because I'm afraid we're on such a tight time scale. And I can see people are really keen to keep going with the discussion, but I'm afraid we really are going to have to ask people to come to a conclusion. Please? Okay, everybody. We're going to start with 1 minute of feedback per group. And I think, also, is your group... You're still debating. Are you ready to provide some feedback? Should we start and go around the room this way? Yep. Okay, so if the first group would like to provide some feedback, please.
Well, we started out with a slight confusion, or maybe it was me who started out with the confusion. Because, trying to kind of think about the issues that were listed here in terms of research topics, finally we skipped that and said, what are the issues that are important for policy engagement? And actually, out of the 12 things that we were discussing, pretty much all of them were necessary, but to a different degree perhaps. So there was a slight consensus in terms of that understanding the context is really important. There's lots of elements to understanding the context. So really, I think throughout all the discussions here in the previous days, we've seen that you really need to, everybody knows here that there is no one solution that fits everybody. And really the political situation, legal situation, and so on is really different. So that was the clear winner in terms of importance. But the other things that we saw is really the stakeholder involvement and kind of interaction and understanding of the needs of the partners and decision makers, and issues like building coalitions with others to get the message if it's long-term difficult issues, like examples of IPCC and so on.
On to group number 2, and we'll just go clockwise around the room here. So,
Go. We had interesting discussions, and given 90 seconds or 60? 60, okay. One of the main aspects we found that some categories were a little bit fuzzy and too general. For example, capacity building. If we build the capacity of decision makers to use, for example, tools, technical tools, or make better decisions, that we agree would be policy making and influencing policy. If you're working with farming communities to use GPS data, for example, as important as it is, might not qualify as policy engagement. Same written outputs. If it's an academic paper or a report to the commission, which ends up in a drawer, then it's not much use for policy engagement. However, if it's a report which is co-written by policymakers, for example, then it's really important if the co-creators of knowledge, etc. So sometimes the categories are fuzzy. However, we thought the consensus was that being advisor to a policy platform was really important. Working in partnerships was extremely important, and talking to people. So this kind of networking idea, connecting with people on a continuous basis, emerges a group consensus. However, sometimes we have to reframe and say, okay, what is report writing? Which kind of report do we need? Which kind of capacity building we need? So the mindset is also important amongst ourselves. I think that was it. Yeah, save some time.
So we also had a really good discussion, I think, and we ended up with the 3 no's here, and these are all things that we find important to do, but that we felt were sort of one step away from policy engagement. So they're part of our research process and important that we do, but they were not considered important for the policy engagement. So these were being grant administered, that SEI sets the rules for research grants that we administer ourselves. And then we also have a no for being part of an evidence base, because this is more sort of a general thing that we aspire to be, but it doesn't influence the policy engagement directly. And then the third no that we had was modeling work to discover new insights, which we also felt were something that we do and that's important, but it's not directly connected to the policy engagement. So, and for the other ones, we had clear yes, and also examples of projects. Quite a lot of projects, so we ran out of space. So that's a good sign, I think. Yeah, that's all.
We had conditions for pathways, pathway conditions, and we did feel that we were we had a project that would reflect every single aspect of the pathway condition, Summonet being a huge example of one of them. But we felt most strongly that the well-developed theory of change, attending events, direct parentheses, engagement with policy processes, and people getting in touch with SEI were the most influential pathway conditions. And one example of a direct policy engagement being the Estonian Estonian Energy Development Plan and Estonian National Climate Adaptation Plan, which were direct policy documents. And also, with attending events, we do this a lot, and the Kenyan Air Quality Network being an example, and the Rice and Arsenic Project in Asia being an example.
Has the bell gone? Can I start? Okay, so we identified 2 things that we thought were really important, contributing to policy documents, and interestingly, the evidence of influence. We thought that was quite important. We identified some things that we kind of gave a yes and a no to. I wonder whether part of that was because there was the option to give a no to something as opposed to, and we felt like we should fill some of that in. The no, we thought funder is happy. That might not necessarily be something that's important, but then we thought actually that might lead to sustainability of research, so perhaps it is important that the funder is happy. Job prospects and boundary partners, we thought, well, that could work both ways. So you might have somebody who moves into an organisation or a process that you know, and that could really help, or you might have somebody that leaves, and that would be really bad. We also identified a couple of other responses. We thought media pressure was a really interesting one. So if you think about the diesel stuff that's going on in Europe at the moment, NGOs, but then we wondered about the possibility of advocacy, and maybe that wasn't such a good thing. And then I think some of the other groups have identified actually working with the government at both the national and local level really made sure that your research was very relevant right from the start, so a bit like a sort of co-design project. And we identified lots of project examples as well, so that was good.
Our group have enabling condition, and these categories for characteristic of SEI. So it's not only one single project. So this is something that we feel is applicable as SEI-wide because it's characteristics of SEI. And we think that the most things that really appeal, this is a kind of SEI, is something is consider ourselves like for the image and reputation and how we be independent in terms of the view and the work we do. Collaborative approach, friendly and non-aggressive, it's a soft approach. And we also try to build the trust. So this is something quite highlighted here. And the second is the work we do always based on demand, and actually a continuation is the key. However, we have a question whether this should be under category of characteristics or the way that we do. So, and we often seen as those who have a strong network partnership approach. And we think that monitoring and evaluation have internal learning among SEIs, why not only for individual project, is also something foreseen as some like people that think that we are really credible for. Okay. Sorry, yeah. So this is a handwriting of executive directors. If you have a question, so just ask it.
Hello? Okay. So for our main ones, we thought it was important that the project is in a good state, redefine government schemes, but also maybe define government schemes. SEI's work is published, bringing people together, but emphasizing that it should be new groups, not just the same people over and over again, or the people who get together a lot. Capacity is built and changes in behavior. Most of them we said yes. We did put a question mark by outcomes were well received because we wanted it to be more specific, like by whom are these outcomes well received? Is it just the usual people, or also is it because we were giving someone what they wanted rather than maybe a difficult answer to a policy question? Also, we talked about how it depends at what part of the process that you're in, you know, like sort of timelines. Some of these are more important at a certain part of a project. And because you got some media people, we added recognized experts by media. And we didn't get to the other part.
That's fantastic. Thank you, everybody. We've just got 1 or 2 minutes left for this part of the session. So just some quick concluding remarks. Like I said in the counting down the time, I think the activity was quite ambitious, but we are on a very tight time scale. We're very keen to continue these discussions, to refine these 80 characteristics. We're very aware that we need some redefinition of some of these characteristics, and it's very interesting, the group over here, having some discussion as to what a particular feature meant to them and the interpretation. So we would like to narrow down these 80 features, working amongst ourselves and with you. So please, if you haven't already put your names on the pages, that would be great. I hope you found this useful, and we will be sharing results and feedback after the Science Forum in the coming weeks and months. And what I'd like to do now is hand back to Johan, who's going to talk through some top tips of policy engagement on the practical side.
You can. That's true. I guess it was a self-serving question, because we'd like to get case studies, because when we talk about our policy engagement, then it's like it's much more real if you then say, and this was very sort of typical in this case study. So that's something we want to sort of roll out. So essentially what we're kind of asking for is, if there are some examples which really show this really well, then we can build a story around it. And telling stories is, after all, an important part of trying to understand how we do things. So it's not, as you say, everything should be influencing policy, or we're doing the wrong thing. But some of them might be really good stories.
Really quick comment back on that. Can we link this to our monitoring evaluation?
That's a good idea. So yes, so there's a lot of linkages between this and the sort of like what's in PMEC and so forth, and the outcome mapping type of. No, I know, but but the things which, like, you know, the outcome mapping that's been used in Summernet to try and evaluate it, that sort of thing. So it's part of the monitoring evaluation. But I'm just saying that within PMEC it's the same ideas. Okay, so and just one. Oh, there's another one here.
Just a short comment as well on that one. I mean, I think we're all in agreement. That's what we want, and you know, all SEI projects are on that scale, whereas in universities they are way off that scale when it's more fundamental research. But just to nuance it a bit, I feel that we do get some requests based on the more scientific work we do, which is not just designed to have policy impact from the start, like the SDGs, for example. So I just think it's not, I'm not surprised that not every, you know, project is listed there. But, so that's another.
Although you could, with an outcome mapping approach, you could make a link back to that work to policy, you know. So what we're going to do then, when we refine these features, is that we're using them to design the further discussions with staff, like with initiatives or project leaders, to get more and more stories and analyze them. So that's the importance of this to us, is that we want to sort of, before we go out and do some more discussions, we want to sort of build on this. Anyway, before we run out of time, I'm going to rush through then some of the right, so a few top tips. So as well as sort of getting you to think about and tell us what you think of policy engagement, I've tried to sort of distill some ideas, which I'd love to get some feedback from you on, which could also help us to frame our policy engagement when we're telling stories about it. So, and this is sort of like a how to, you know, develop a good policy engagement approach. And it's heavily plagiarized from other people's work, such as the ODI. And some of this will be obvious, so I showed it to someone and they seemed a bit underwhelmed because, well, yes, but that's kind of good if we get that sort of response, that it's not totally off the wall. And then tomorrow what I'm going to do is use this framework to initiate discussions with those who are going to come to that training session. So, and all of these tips can be used to develop a theory of change and plan engagement. That's the idea of it. So, this is and this is sort of just trying to distill from what I understand of SEI, and you may disagree with it, and I'd like to know if you do, or you may think I'm missing something. But it seems to me that a lot of the comments around the room, like there was one, you know, sort of people coming to SEI and asking for inputs is really important way for us to engage with policymaking. Well, that's only going to happen if we've got credibility, that we're known within an area, we're experts, you know. So this is really important that we are seen as a credible, trustworthy institute who knows what we're talking about. And there are various ways of doing that. That's what I've put as my entry point. The second, everyone sort of says, well, of course we should know this. So understanding the political, social, cultural, and economic context related to your activity. But how often do we really do this? How often do we really analyze the political context, the policy context where we're trying to work? So we should really try and acquire policy acumen, as they say, which is really an awareness, knowledge, and insight of the policy-making sphere. We need to sit in the seat of the policymaker and understand their world and their demands if we're going to be effective. And we need to, the only way to do that is to really engage with the decision makers so that we can really understand them. And we need to really work on our network. I mean, almost every project we do involves other organizations, I think. And so it's hugely important that we are part of networks, that we develop these networks. They're both science policy networks, or they could be scientific networks where we can have more influence by being engaged with them. And so it's really important to nurture our position within these. And we need to know what it is we want to influence. What is it? Is it a policy? Is it awareness? Is it a decision by an intergovernmental process or behavioral change? We need to have a very clear concept of what it is we want people to, influence. And also, therefore, we need to know who we want to influence. So as we said before, the sort of approach that SEI has taken and it's the approach within outcome mapping, for example, is that it's about people. So people can make change. So we need to work on people, and these are our boundary partners. And so we can't work with everyone, but we can work with people who are influencers and then can influence further people and have a change in decision making. And also, as we were talking about the need to achieve change at scales, we also need to understand how these different things link up. So how are we going to get to scale? Who do we need to talk to? And I think that there are several projects where we're linking, for example, community work through to national government or local government. You know, understanding how we can both working at the community level, but then leveraging it, using that leverage and getting up to scale. Know when to influence. So we heard about this, I think several people said yesterday, that, you know, we've got to understand when it is that our information is most relevant. So it's not much point producing evidence beyond the decision-taking point. And we need to be flexible. and I think we are actually, that's one of our success factors in SEI, is that we are a pretty flexible institute. Something happens, we jump on it. But do we do that in every case? Do we have the flexibility built in? And are people aware of the opportunities to be flexible, you know, when they join the institute? Not every, like in the university, they're not quite as flexible, I don't think. But we have to be. But we also need to try and foresee opportunity. And I think it's important, you know, I know that people maybe think that we don't need to get into the theory of decision making, but it is important just to sort of understand how we can engage with decision making and to learn from what people have been talking about for a lot of time. So the idea of the linear model where we are knowledge producers and the policymakers are consumers of that, willing consumers of that knowledge, just doesn't, it's just not reality. And it's dead. And there are lots of other models. So, and each of them are nuanced around certain things, like the political model, putting in the context of politics, an incremental model saying that, well, policy tends to move in baby steps, you know, it takes a long time for things to change, or the Enlightenment model, where essentially when you've got a large body of evidence and everyone's saying the same thing, like the IPCC, suddenly you can start getting change. And we need to plan our engagement. The theory of change. So in the research directorate, when we looked through all the initiatives, there was a general feeling that all of the theories of change, which was a prerequisite in those proposals, were not very good, really, including the one I wrote. So I think there's work to be done here, you know, I don't know how much planning we do for the policy engagement when we develop our programs, or exactly how much thought. It's kind of just an intuitive process of, well, of course we engage with policy and, you know, it's going to be great, but how much do we do it formally? And this has already been said, we need to focus on solutions, not just problems, but we can't fall into advocacy. And we can't try and be policy prescriptive. It really annoys policymakers if you tell them what to do, or try to tell them what to do. And I think we're fairly good at this, but we mustn't fall into that trap of being prescriptive. But, you know, so we have scenarios and say, well, if you do this, this is going to happen. But also, when we look at an entry point, so usually we go in there thinking we want to look at this issue, such as CO2 from the transport sector, and you come up with a solution. Diesel vehicles, great, you know, lower CO2 per kilometre, and you get a benefit of lower CO2 per kilometre. But, you know, we've really got to understand the unintended consequences. Oh dear, we've got a massive increase in nitrogen oxide emissions and particulate emissions from diesel vehicles, and now they want to ban them from all the cities of Europe. But also, when we're looking at solutions, so you could say, well, public transport's much better, and you say, well, okay, so we reduce CO2, we reduce air pollution, and we probably reduce congestion. But what about active transport? Well, then we're going to reduce congestion, we're going to reduce pollution, and people are going to get healthier, and we're going to reduce diabetes, and et cetera, et cetera. And we need to stack up, I believe, all of these benefits and also understand the unintended consequences of policies if we're going to give good policy advice. This doesn't come for free. Influencing decision making is an art, and we all need to become artists at this. It's not easy because, I mean, if it was easy, then everyone would be doing it successfully. And it's kind of learning by doing is part of it. And one of the things that Stephen Lintner in one of these sessions said, that he said, do the boring stuff. If you're going to become essential within a process, you volunteer to take notes, you volunteer to do stuff, to talk to people, to engage. You've got to do the boring stuff, and then you kind of get ingrained in the process, you know, and I thought that's too true, you know, and then they come back to you if you're prepared to do the boring stuff. And it takes time, you know. I think most of our successes are ones where we've we've been at it for a long time. And the last one was also, somebody said before that, well, universities are way over here in the sort of academic sphere and they don't engage with policy. Well, it's changing very rapidly, and certainly in the UK, 30% of the money they get is about impact, and they're all rushing around trying to work out how they're all going to have impact. So the universities are entering our sphere very rapidly, and I guess that's only going to increase. But anyway, so one of the discussions there, I think Emma went to the one, was, somebody engaged in a policy-making process in Africa as a lost leader, and because they then had put in that work, they'd ended up with a huge project afterwards. So we have to invest in the process. Got to communicate the message. Talk to Rob and team. But also, the messenger can be more influential than the message, What about champions? I mean, we can be champions and push a message where we can within a policy-making sphere, but we could also identify champions, and I don't know how much we do that. I say, well, who are the champions? The people who can just walk into ministers' offices and have a chat, who have the scientific knowledge, who we could work with and then have influence. And obviously raising awareness with things like the media, because they're obviously influential. And we had an interesting talk in York by a political scientist saying, well, you're not going to get much change anywhere unless you have strong institutions. If you haven't got strong institutions in a country, the chances that you're going to get change are diminished. So we've got to build capacity, and Orsa's going to be telling us all about that later on. And then we, whether we keep track of it in PMEC or not, we need to develop a way of monitoring this and getting better. So we have to become a learning institution. Discuss. But, I know that Summernet did it successfully, partly because it was paid to do it. We can do it, and we learn a lot from it, but we don't do it always as a matter of course. And the other thing is that often we stop at a project, and you might evaluate it, but the policy impact might happen 3 years afterwards, because policy making doesn't. And how often do we go back and ask people, that thing, that policy that you made, did anyone ever implement it? There's an opportunity there. Anyway, those are my top tips. And now we're going to move on. How are we doing for time? Really badly, I guess. Okay, 20 minutes. That's what we've allocated for Kalpana. So just some quick reactions. I mean, does this sort of make sense, or does people say, my God, you've forgotten something?
Well, most of the things that you talked about really made sense. But I would say that even perhaps we could get the list shorter and stick to the essentials. And I think sometimes we might have a tendency to, overthink or to an overkill, like the theory of change. I think finally, if you have a list of 5 top tips and you check and think beforehand with the project, shall I do this? Have we done this? Then it's already, 85% of the impact is that. And the rest is just, the marginal cost might be, again, too high. So I think very good stuff here to discuss and to remember, but really not overdo it, but just, start engaging with the, stakeholders. One of the things all the time when I hear the word boundary partners, maybe it's because I'm not native speaker. Somehow for me it's about borders or boundaries. So why not, forget about the boundary partners and start talking about partners or partners in change or something like that? Because for me, somehow, I have kind of, when somebody says boundary partners, it means that they are there, we are here. And then we try, through the theory of change, become friends. Let's start out together, and talk about partners. Just a remark.
Yeah, a good remark. I mean, that's part of the problem. I think people, probably everyone in this room has a different definition of a boundary partner, but it's kind of come from a literature, but I have personally no love of the term, but it has a background. So one here, one there, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just two quick comments. One, your point about the policy impact happening after resonated with me, because a project we did on county energy planning, which didn't go as well as, well, it went fine. We had to sort of adapt the project as we went forward. And it was a couple of years later when we were actually brought back in to a nationwide project, nationwide process to kind of develop county energy plans, and they started citing the work we'd done. And it was only because we had sort of continual engagement with some of the actors at the national level and so on that we could kind of be invited, so that kind of long-term engagement even outside of the project. And the second thing is that many of the initiatives and various projects do have, SEI do have a political economy work package perhaps, or something around governance and political economy. And I was thinking to your point about understanding the political context, because I don't think those work packages or the work done there are is being used to identify opportunities for where the other work packages could actually have influence. They're just being used to kind of highlight the sort of situation, or maybe from a research perspective understand the political economy, but not being used as a kind of window into where the rest of the work could have impact. And that might be a way to utilize that good work we do.
Yeah, I think that's the challenge. So yes, so one last comment. No, very quick comment from Stefan.
Yeah, just a comment. First point, and this might be nitpicking, but I would suggest the first slide to read not build credibility, but build on credibility, because SEI was recently ranked the #1 think tank, environmental think tank in the world. We have a wealth of data every year. There was a graph. We publish more academic papers, more reports. We are invited to collaborate with different boundary partners, for example. So why be so modest and say we have still to build credibility, still write this report, still write that paper, but just take this knowledge which is out there. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, and use this knowledge and repackage it, reformulate it, would perhaps be also like a good strategy for policy engagement. Build on credibility, not necessarily build credibility, because perhaps we have it already.
Well, I guess even though I've been brought up in England, there's a Swede in me somewhere, and you can't go shouting about our achievements too much. Okay, so but what I'm really looking forward to now is hearing how Asia is moving forward in thinking about this. So Kalpana, does this work? Yeah. Try that. Probably no different.
Okay, thank you, Jan. So right now, I'm wearing the hat of a policy node from the ACI Center. So I will try to just give you a flavor of where ACI Center stands in terms of thinking about policy change, impacts, boundary partners, and how we really want to take it forward. And we also want to hear from you whether our visioning and the pathways that we are thinking are realistic, and we really want that type of perspective. So I'll do that in 3 ways. First, I will explain where ACI Center stands in terms of the policy visioning and work, what are our plans, and what are our next immediate plans, actually, and what do we need that we don't have yet to take it forward. Before I start discussing about where ACI Center stands in terms of policy work, I think I would like to give a little bit of background on how we started thinking about the policy work in ACI Center. One of the things, after Niall came on board, and there are some people who are already interested in looking at the impacts in a much more tangible way. And then we thought, we are in Asia, we're in Bangkok, and I think you all already got a flavor of how convenient Bangkok is, not only in terms of drinks and having meetups and parties, but it's well connected to the region, one, right? Second, it has the UN regional office, which makes major decisions that affect the region. Third, it hosts many different CS organizations that are acting very actively in the region. So in terms of, if you look at it, is the ease of access to outreach with these partners and stakeholders, I think the Asia Center is very much well situated. So we have that ease of access, a better vantage point, I guess, than people who are working in US or Stockholm, when we need to think about who are the stakeholders that we need to link to when working on this specific topic. We know them, they are around us, right? Who are the influential bodies that are actually, having a say on all these bigger policy changes, like SDGs, for example? Who are holding these discussions? Can we reach them out? Of course we can. We have a better vantage point for sure. Then we thought, okay, if we have a better vantage point, then are we really accessing that vantage point? Do we really want to use that vantage point or not? So I think out of that brainstorming discussion appeared the policy vision of SEI Center, where I think Stefan came in and he did an internal assessment, talked to a few people around the center, and then tried to make a sense of where do we stand in terms of our policy visioning. And out of that, what came was this strategy document. And if you look at page 18, you will see how can we bridge science and policy, and how would that engage, what is the type of engagement strategy that we are looking for. So I would really encourage all of you to really read page 18, as well as the others, like Niall suggested in previous days, and give us your input, whether we really think the way we think is a realistic one or not. So what we really want to get out of this policy engagement is, I think we want to enhance the visibility of SEI as a policy advice provider. And we want to be a to-go organization for different policy stakeholders and decision makers in relation to decision making related to environment, gender, development, and many other sectors that we're working on. What are we doing about it at the moment? So we have this strategy that would guide us. We also have a draft action plan that Stefan developed, which talks about 10 action points on what can be potentially done. And that is a reflection of the internal assessment of where SEI stands, what are its opportunities, what are its challenges, and I think we want to link that with ASA and really try to see what are the capacity gaps of our staff first to understand policy issues, and then how can we use that enhanced capacity to deal with the stakeholders or boundary partners that we work with. So I think that's what would be our next immediate step. The other big thing that we are also thinking about is we are developing a concept note in the region which will bring different research organizations together, and they will be providing a consolidated watch and advice to key policy decisions that is happening in the region. And we are aiming to have SDGs as one of the key policy framework that we will be closely monitoring and providing advices to. We are still fleshing out the details. We're still reaching out to some of the research partners to come and get engaged with that consortium. But the whole idea was that there are different players in the region and they are providing their services through different channels. How about we actually consolidate the research voice, take the evidence, tailor-made it to the right audience, and really try to make an impact. So we are really trying to think that big, and we wanted to work on certain specific SDGs where we have our certain niche and advantage. The proposal has gained some traction with CEDA, and we are trying to develop the final proposal, the concept note, perhaps in a month, I guess. So I think that's where we stand at the moment. And I would really like to hear from you, whether you and the other centers have already thought about policy and have taken some approach to think about the issues in the way we are thinking now. And if you can share your experience, I think that would be awesome. Thank you.
So, are there some questions for Kalpana? Niall.
Just another question, just to add some more to what's there. We're just very bad on mics. We're just in the process of, hopefully this week, agreeing on a candidate for a new senior policy expert who will be brought onto the team, hopefully in the next few months. Initially working directly with SummerNet to try and push that through. does? Okay, well, I can't hear. Okay, but so we're going to bring in a new person to really push on policy support. So initially they will work with Summernet. They'll also try and work with the rest of the teams and look at the other support that some of the other teams need based on some of the work that Stefan has done. And each of the strategies that has been set from page 1 to page 20, they have specific kind of policies that they were targeting initially. So in mind we have a number of policies we want to try and approach. To build on not just having policy senior expert on board here, we also are trying to, and most likely will get, see the conference support facility funds for the next 5 years. And that will allow us to do up to 2 different regional conferences for each of the research clusters a year, which will enable us to put our policy position out at a regional level. So really put ourselves in the face of the regional decision makers through these policy forums. So we're going to hopefully have more profile building, more access to the senior policy makers per research cluster. And then the last thing we want to do is we're recruiting now new communications people, and hopefully by the end of this year we'll have 3 or 4 full-time communicators, some of them dedicated to really pushing the policy briefs out. So whatever research we do, we can get the right documentation to go out, because it's not about academic reports, it's about smarter information that we can help influence policy. So building on what Kalpana said, there's quite a lot of kind of foundation work being put in place, and we want to position ourselves so that we can build on what is standing on the shoulders of giants. We build on the researchers who are doing incredible work here and give them the extra support to push it further, a little bit further, to try and enhance policy. So again, we're trial by error is probably the process that we're going at. We're pushing as much as we can, but we want to link with Johan and the team and see what we're doing, if it is as impactful as we want it to be, or what other steps we can make to make it more impactful. So any ideas from all of you is very welcome.
See your hand here. Yeah.
I'll just do a comment back. It's interesting that Niall brought me into the process of recruiting that senior policy person. I thought that was very interesting, and I thought also it was clear that you got some good candidates, which is a good sign that people are seeing SEI as an important place to work, or a good place to work.
Could I just ask to what extent you will reach out as well to South Asia? So if you think about India, Nepal, Bangladesh, that is where a lot of your people have done a lot of work, and we've seen over the years a lot of policy challenges there. So I do wonder if you were to recruit a new person, whether there would be any chance to as well reach out to South Asia, which is obviously a rather different region, and as well probably not that important for all the agencies that are based in Bangkok, because they have their own agencies in Delhi. But it would be really interesting whether you could maybe do something there as well, and we would be very interested in that, to join you as well, I guess, on that one.
Yeah, certainly, yes. I think with pleasure, I would say. And there were some discussions within the team on how would we actually outreach much more extensively to South Asia as well. So there were some people who were assigned to attend some of the regional platforms in Asia as well, and we're, I think, taking a close look at that. But thank you for mentioning that York Center has been really active in South Asia, and definitely I think we can include that in our plan as well.
Right, thank you. I think we need to wrap up now, so we keep our allotted time. There's a lot of text there. So thanks a lot, Kalpana, and we look forward to working with you to increase policy engagement here. So we've got, on our work plan for the policy engagement, there's a number of things that we want to do. We want to develop a group where people from different centres, so we can interact much more. We'll be developing the training session. So tomorrow is a trial run for the training session, focusing mainly on SEI Asia, and this is something we'd like to roll around the centres. We also we want to develop these case studies. So and with these case studies, we've had various attempts at gathering information and trying to develop a case study database, and we need to enhance that to be able to tell the stories. We also want to tell the stories, apparently we don't do blogs anymore, but perspective pieces or something. Is that right, Rob? Yeah. Whatever. Anyway, whatever it's called, we've got a one which we developed with Pete Erickson on some of the interesting work they've been doing. And we'd like to develop a lot more of those and get them onto the SEI website to highlight not only that we're doing stuff, but that we're having, you know, trying to tease out how we went about it as well. You know, how did we get the policy engagement, as well as, oh, we did some great work on water or air or something. So we can only do this with your support, and so we'll be targeting people and trying to twist your arms to help us to develop this information so that we can get it out to the outside world and make it clear to the outside world that we are concentrating on policy engagement. So I think that's all. We'll be trying to feed back with a report from this session to you. We'll do a few nice bar charts on the basis of some of your dots, and if you've got any further comments, if you've got pieces of paper on your, you know, in the tea break or whatever. Is it tea break now? Yes. Coffee break. I think I need a beer break. But you know, write down comments and hand them in to us. Anything that you think, oh, you missed this, or you're doing that wrong, or you're doing that right, or anything you like, please hand it to us, and then we'll put that in to our report. So thanks a lot.
And just for the session tomorrow, I do appreciate the fact that you're staying on and doing this work, but it's for everybody, not just the agency.
Yeah.
So if you're here tomorrow, come and help us develop what we're trying to do here in Asia with your experiences and your input. So it's here in this room tomorrow at 10.
So any hangers-on who wants to be subjected to more of this, come tomorrow and join the SEI Asia staff and us and have a further discussion. We'll have 2.5 hours, so we'll be able to go into some of these things in more detail. So thank you very much.
One thing, is this working? There are some feedback forms on your tables as well, please. So if people wouldn't mind filling those in, that'd be great. Thank you.